My boss turned my innovations into his promotions, so I turned his arrogance into his unemployment check. Richard was the type of manager who treated the office like his personal kingdom and the rest of us like his peasants. He'd stroll in around 10:30 a.m. with his overpriced coffee, spend half the day on personal calls, and leave by 4 p.m. sharp. Yet somehow, every breakthrough our team achieved magically became his idea by the next board meeting. I watched him pull this stunt with everyone. When Elena developed a cost-cutting protocol that saved us $200,000 annually, Richard presented it as his efficiency initiative. When David created a client feedback system that improved our satisfaction scores by 40%, Richard stood at the front of the conference room claiming he'd been workshopping this concept for months. But I was his favorite target. If I suggested a new workflow during team meetings, Richard would nod dismissively and say, "Let me think about that." 24 hours later, he'd be in the CEO's office pitching my exact idea as his latest stroke of genius. I developed a vendor management system that streamlined our procurement process and cut costs by 25%. Guess who got the recognition? Richard even had the audacity to include it in his performance review as evidence of his strategic thinking. The pattern escalated over time. I created a customer analytics dashboard that helped our sales team identify high-value prospects. Richard not only took credit but submitted it for a company innovation award. When he won, he hung the certificate right outside my cubicle where I'd see it every morning. The nameplate read Richard Thompson Innovation Excellence Award. When I designed an automated reporting system that eliminated 20 hours of manual work per week, Richard locked me out of the implementation meeting. He told the executives he'd been burning the midnight oil perfecting this solution for months. The board was so impressed they featured it in the company newsletter with a full-page article about Richard's visionary leadership. Everything reached a breaking point when I spent 4 months developing a revolutionary project management platform. I worked weekends until my back ached from hunching over my laptop. I skipped family dinners, cancelled plans with friends, and barely saw daylight outside the office. My wife kept asking why I was destroying my health for a company that barely acknowledged my existence. I told her this project would finally get me the recognition I deserved. The platform would transform how we handled client projects, potentially saving the company millions in operational costs. I had documentation for every feature, every test case, every bug fix. My fingerprints were all over that code. But when the quarterly review arrived, there was Richard presenting my platform to the entire executive team. He stood there with my flowcharts, my technical specifications, my 4 months of sacrifice, describing it as his passion project that he'd been architecting in his spare time. My stomach churned as I watched from the back of the room. The CEO's face lit up like Christmas morning. He announced that Richard would receive a $50,000 performance bonus and immediate promotion to Vice President of Operations. After the meeting, Richard actually had the nerve to approach me. He put his hand on my shoulder with that smug smile and said, "Mitchell, you should be grateful that your work was good enough for me to present to leadership. Not everyone gets that kind of validation." That was my breaking point. I knew complaining to HR would be useless since Richard's brother-in-law sat on the executive committee. But Richard had one glaring weakness, his desperate need for external validation. He was obsessed with his professional image, constantly updating his LinkedIn profile and bragging about his achievements at industry events. So I decided to weaponize that narcissism. I spent 2 weeks creating a fake executive search firm called Apex Talent Solutions. I built a professional website, registered a virtual office address, and set up a dedicated phone line with professional voicemail. Then I crafted the persona of Victoria Chun, a senior executive recruiter with an impressive LinkedIn profile showcasing 12 years of experience placing C-suite executives at Fortune 500 companies. After perfecting every detail, Victoria reached out to Richard via LinkedIn. Her message was irresistible bait. "Richard, your transformational leadership at your current company has generated significant buzz in executive circles. We have a confidential opportunity with a Fortune 100 client that could potentially quadruple your current compensation package." Richard responded within 30 minutes. Over the following weeks, Victoria masterfully stroked his ego. She told him that multiple CEOs had specifically requested him by name, that his innovative strategies were being studied at Wharton Business School, that Silicon Valley headhunters were calling him the next big thing in operations management. Richard devoured every word and started dropping hints to colleagues about being pursued by top-tier companies. The real breakthrough came when Victoria asked Richard to describe his current workplace dynamics. Richard launched into a vicious 25-minute tirade about how incompetent everyone was. He called the CEO a relic who couldn't spot talent if it wore a neon sign. He described the board as a collection of fossils stuck in the past. He labeled his team deadweight, and specifically mentioned me as someone who needs constant supervision and handholding. He claimed he'd been single-handedly carrying the entire organization for years. Every word was recorded. The final act was pure poetry. Victoria informed Richard that he'd advanced to the ultimate round, an in-person presentation to the full board of directors at a major tech conglomerate in Seattle. Richard was so ecstatic that he submitted his resignation that very afternoon, effective immediately. He even organized a farewell celebration where he gave a self-aggrandizing speech about knowing when to leave mediocrity behind and embrace destiny. 3 days later, Richard flew to Seattle for his final interview. He arrived at the address Victoria had provided, which turned out to be a small neighborhood grocery store. The confused cashier had no idea who he was or what he was talking about. When Richard frantically called Victoria, he discovered the number was disconnected. The website had vanished. Every trace of Apex Talent Solutions had evaporated into thin air. But that recording of Richard savagely attacking our company had mysteriously appeared in our CEO's email inbox that same morning. By the time Richard returned from Seattle, his access badge had been deactivated and security had already packed up his office belongings. The CEO's only statement was that the company doesn't rehire individuals who publicly describe their workplace as mediocre and their colleagues as incompetent. Richard spent 8 months unemployed as word of his unprofessionalism spread throughout our industry. When he finally found new employment, it was at a local grocery chain as an assistant manager. The same type of store where he'd stood confused and humiliated, looking for his fake dream job. Sometimes karma needs a little help finding its target.